Morning, everybody. So I actually meant to have some really cool soul music, and I ended up with my Saturday morning coffee music on there. Sorry, you guys. Welcome to Resistance Live. This is our brand new time, which is actually our old time from when I lived in New York City before. I'm really glad you guys are here. I am ECM as always, and it is the 29th of July, 2024. We have a lot to discuss today, most specifically the recent op-ed that dropped this morning in the Washington Post from Joe Biden about all of the Supreme Court reforms that he is currently calling for. But first things first, today I'm coming to you from my still unfinished, no stuff arrived from LA space. I promise the background's going to change soon, you guys. I am, for our visually challenged viewers, wearing a lime green top with a black jacket over top today. My hair is down, my thick gold hoops are in. I'm a pink skinned, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. And I am super excited that you are here today. Okay, so this morning, Biden, in an op-ed in the Washington Post, called for three things, and they are very, very big. One of them is an end to presidential immunity. Essentially, he's calling for an overturning of the recent decision by the Supreme Court that granted Trump immunity for acts taken while in office within the purview of presidential authority as they defined it. This is an extremely positive step in the right direction. And I had told everybody at the time that this went down that one of the reasons why we needed to be extremely conscious about electing Democrats up and down the ticket in this election was that one of the ways in which that ruling could be altered would be through legislation. In this instance, what the president is calling for is actually a constitutional amendment. And I think that would be fantastic. But the thing everybody needs to understand about constitutional amendments is they have to be approved at the state level. 2/3 of the state legislatures need to approve a constitutional amendment. What happens when you've got state legislatures that are largely controlled by Republicans is that it's very difficult to get a constitutional amendment passed. We've seen this, by the way, with the Equal Rights Amendment, which is now expired because it didn't pass enough state legislatures before the expiration date. So one of the things that I want people to be conscious about here, and again, this is just a reminder for today, is that every single electoral office matters. Okay. I know there are a lot of us that are focused right now on the election of Kamala Harris, which is amazing. But I have to remind you all that if you are not also simultaneously focused on both the House and the Senate and your state elections, you will be missing out on an opportunity to change democracy for the better. Because fundamentally, if we have Republican-led state legislatures, which, by the way, has been the long game of people like the Koch brothers and the Mercers, it is impossible to pass constitutional amendments that are truly democratic. What the Kochs and the Mercers have been trying to do, literally for decades now, is amass enough Republican-controlled legislatures to call for a constitutional convention, which would alter the face of the U.S. Constitution forever. Okay. So again, I want people to be reminded that things like constitutional amendments depend on state elections. And so incredibly critical that in your mobilization work in this season, you do not neglect elections to your state Senate, your state House, even your city council and your local elections, which impact so much of our daily lives, right? So again, all in favor of the constitutional amendment that is being proposed by Joe Biden, but it will not be able to be accomplished unless there is a 2/3 vote by state legislatures to amend the Constitution of the United States. All right. Now, for those of you who are asking about other things like, can we overturn Citizens United? Can we codify Roe versus Wade? That can be done at the national level, assuming that we have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, which does not at this moment, by the way, mean 2/3 of the Senate. It means enough Democrats elected who are willing to jettison the filibuster through what's called the nuclear option, which is essentially a rules change in the Senate, much like what Mitch McConnell did, for instance, to pass through judges, as did Harry Reid. Again, we need to have enough Democratic senators, however, who are willing to vote for the rules change to accomplish things like codifying Roe versus Wade. Okay. Then we have to control the House, because laws can't be made unless both houses of government agree. And then we need a Democratic president. So we have we have so much work that needs to be done in this election cycle, but the local and state elections, along with your federal elections, really, really matter. Like, again, please do not neglect your state elections in this cycle because it's critical. Okay. The other thing that Biden called for, there were two other things actually that he called for in terms of Supreme Court reform, both of which would be amazing. One is a code of ethics for the Supreme Court that is mandatory and enforceable, meaning you can be removed from the court if you violate it, mandatory recusals if you violate it. These are all things that we desperately need because there is no mandatory code of ethics right now in terms of the Supreme Court. There is only this kind of like random self-enforcing set of policies that Roberts announced late last year that have really kind of gone nowhere, right? And there's no mechanism to enforce them whatsoever. So this, again, is really critical. And then what Biden is calling for, which I love, is an 18-year term limit for Supreme Court justices, meaning a new Supreme Court justice would be appointed every 2 years. That, by the way, would serve the process of balancing out the court. It would prevent things like what happened under Donald Trump, where 3 justices were nominated in a 4-year term. Again, these kinds of reforms are incredibly critical. Now, Biden has not gone so far as to call for expansion of the Supreme Court, which, as many of you know, is one of my kind of like pet projects, along with folks like Elie Mystal and others. A lot of us who have been litigators, who are real, justice commentators in some form or another, desperately want the Supreme Court expanded to 13 seats, 1 for each circuit court of appeals in our federal system. I don't see that happening, anytime soon, unless, I'm like a broken record today, we take back the Senate and the House, because modifications to the Supreme Court must go through both the House and the Senate. All right. So again, what has happened this morning is brilliant, and it is a move in the right direction. All right. But is it going to be able to be accomplished while Biden is a lame duck president in the next 6 months? No. The earliest, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. It could happen after the Senate and the House is sat in early January, before Harris becomes president. Okay. That's a when, not an if, because I'm going to assume all of us are going to do the work, right? It could happen in that small window, but can it happen before we take back the House and before we elect a filibuster-proof majority that's willing to jettison the filibuster for an issue like this? No. Okay. But incredibly critical that we start doing this work. All right. And again, this is a key issue. I have to remind you all, we elect candidates to get us as close as possible to the destination that we want to go to. I saw somebody refer to this online, and I can't remember the attribution, so please forgive me. But someone online described this as, it's like elections are like riding a bus. Okay. You get on the bus that takes you as close as possible to the destination that you want to reach. All right. You don't jettison that. You don't say, I'm not riding the bus at all, because it doesn't go exactly where you want it to go. Right. For me, the critical issue here is that we elect Democrats up and down the ticket, and then we continue to do the work of participatory democracy by advocating for exactly what we want in terms of Supreme Court and judicial reform. I mean, this is really, like, fundamentally, these are really key basic issues that should not trouble anyone, but we are not going to be able to accomplish it unless we actually move in the right direction here and get done what needs to get done in November. All right. We had a bunch of questions this morning on the Patreon feed. Reminder, you can become a Patreon subscriber by going to patreon.com/resistancelive. Subscription started as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. You get to ask me questions that I will answer on the air or in writing if I don't have time to actually get to them while we're here. All right. So please consider joining us if you have questions. Lots of questions this morning about AI, political propaganda, political deepfakes. Why? Because Elon Musk is out there apparently on X posting alleged audio of Kamala Harris that is actually not real, that is modified, deep-faked AI audio. All right. So let me say a couple of things about this. The conference that I spoke at this weekend, by the way, in the Hudson Valley, was a conference on AI. And one of the things that I was asked to talk about at that conference was media literacy and disinformation and political messaging strategy, and how that intersects with what we're seeing in terms of political AI. All right. Meaning like deepfake audio, which is much, much more advanced at this point than deepfake video. So let me just say a couple of things about this. All right. I've said this before here, but I'm going to repeat it because we have a lot of new subscribers. It is really, really, really important right now, for purposes of the current electoral cycle and every electoral cycle going forward, that you do not circulate any video or audio without making 100% sure that it is real. All right. And we had an issue with this morning, even on the Patreon feed, where someone circulated something that I knew instantly was not correct. You have to vet this stuff very, very carefully. All right. And don't repost it, even if you think it's fake, without designating it in some way as fake, all right? Because one of the things that's so true about political propaganda is they rely on people on our side of the fence to circulate it. This is one reason why I say to all of you, do not circulate propaganda from the other side. Do not circulate their talking points. Do not circulate anything, no, not even screenshots, without putting a big red X through it, because otherwise it's going to be shared by people and it may actually filter down to the people it's supposed to affect, all right? So incredibly important not to circulate anything without knowing that it's real. Now, how do we address the issue of like AI and political propaganda generally? Well, that's a conversation like that's much broader. And the good news is that there are tools being developed, some of which are being developed at like, research labs in higher education institutions right now that will be able to designate something as AI before you even see it. We're essentially seeing like plugins that are being developed for places like Twitter and other forms of social media, including YouTube, that will be able to tell you right away if something is AI modified or real. All right. However, the problem right now is that those tools are not actually all that accurate. An AI expert at this conference that I was speaking at said that the tools that we have right now can designate 20% of the time correctly whether or not something is AI modified. So what does that mean right now? It means that it's on you and I to make sure that we are not circulating anything that we do not know is 100% like actually true or accurate or real. Okay. And so this is one reason why in our Truth or Fiction program, let me just throw the banner up here for that. This is our anti-disinformation program that you can get in on at any time, Truth or Fiction. We teach you in that program how to deal with the current reality where we know disinformation, and particularly AI disinformation propagated by bots, is circulating nonstop. All right. And in that program, one of the things that we recommend is that actually you don't circulate anything unless you are like 100% sure that it's real, and that you do your own fact checking in real time if you have questions. And we teach you how to do that. All right. Again, this is a skill set that everybody really needs right now in this moment. But the long and the short of it is that if you're not going to do our program for whatever reason, I will just tell you that I want to encourage you to be exceedingly, exceedingly cautious about sharing anything that purports to be damaging video or audio of a candidate on our side of the fence. Because I will just tell you that my perception of this is that this is, generally speaking, an operation that is being conducted by the far right in this country and bad actors outside of it. And it is advancing minute by minute into things that are very difficult to discern. So be very, very, very cautious about what you share online, even if you're suspicious that it's not real. All right. And, generally speaking, again, just big reminder, don't share far right propaganda, even to be like, can you believe how insane this is? Like, don't do that. You've all seen me do this on threads where I will say things like, I'm not sharing that. I'm not sharing that thing but here's what I'm going to say about it. Right. And that's because I don't want to give it clicks. And because I don't want it to reach people who might actually believe it. And I don't want to do the dirty work of the far right for it. So all of this is incredibly important in terms of the skill sets that we all need right now in this era. All right. Okay. Let's talk for a second about another question that was asked on the feed, which I think is really vital today. All right. One of the questions that I was asked by one of our Patreon subscribers was, how do I talk to my office mates and my coworkers about the importance of this election, especially in like a proportional hierarchy? All right. So let me just say something here. I think that a lot of us now, and I had assumed this was the case before, but I think it's even more so the case now that Harris is the president, is a presidential candidate rather. I'm acting a little ahead of the game there. One of the things that I want people to be thoughtful about here is that every single conversation you have in life is an opportunity to get out the vote. Every single conversation. Okay. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with saying to your coworkers at work, so how do you feel about Kamala Harris being the nominee? And seeing what you get back, right? The exception to this is if you work in a place where taking a political position runs contrary to the mission of the organization. So like if you're in a 501c3 nonprofits cannot in any official capacity take a political position on a party or a candidate. Okay. You can lose your nonprofit status if you do that. There are certain environments where I think that's, you got to be a little bit more cautious. But do I think that it's okay to ask your coworkers about like what they think about what's happened in recent political developments? Absolutely. Do I think that that's a tremendous opportunity, like over the water cooler, so to speak, to motivate people to get out the vote and maybe clarify some disinformation in real time? Yes. Okay, this person is getting blocked. Okay, I'm just going to say something here. If you are a person who thinks that, like daily activities are not a place where politics exists, I'm going to remind you that literally everything that happens in your life has a political component to it. Okay, whether or not you take your kids to public school, whether or not you ride public transportation, whether or not you have access to quality food where you live, whether or not your water is safe to drink, whether or not you live in a place where your housing is affordable, whether or not you are the person who is doing your checkout at the grocery store is being paid a livable wage. Literally every single thing that you encounter in your daily life is impacted by our political environment. Okay, it's like that famous slogan: the political is personal, the personal is political. No question about it. All right. Now, for the people who are saying it's a no-no in my work environment, I want to just ask you a question. Do you ever have conversations with your colleagues outside of work? And I'm just going to say one other thing. There are First Amendment issues related to this. Like, unless you are in an environment where for a legal reason, you are not allowed to talk about politics, meaning like you're in a 501c3 environment where even still you may be having some conversations about politics. I just want to remind everyone of this, okay? You may have a drink with your colleagues outside of work, right? You're not at work when you're doing that. You may go out for lunch and sit down and eat a sandwich with somebody that you work with. You're not at work, right? So again, don't take the easy way out, like especially in this election cycle. And I'm talking specifically here to the white folks, all right? Because one thing I want to remind you of is that like we don't like to be uncomfortable. We've talked about this a lot on the broadcast, right? That one of the things that has been such a challenge and one of the reasons why 2016 went the way that it did was because too many of us were afraid to step outside our comfort zone and talk to other white people about the importance of voting in the election. It's never been more important than it is like right now, all right? And we're not gonna at this moment, right? Like use that as an excuse. Now, again, I see some of you are state government employees. I get it. All right. I understand that there are certain types of workplaces where this sort of thing is not possible. But for everybody else, there are no excuses. Okay. If there is a legal reason why you are not allowed to talk about political matters at work, don't do that. Okay. But do not use the idea that like politics is forbidden in my workplace, or it's kind of uncomfortable, or my boss says we're not supposed to talk about it. That's not a legitimate excuse. All right. And again, it's so important that we take every single opportunity between now and November to have these critical conversations about getting out the vote. Like in my opinion, and you all know, like I've been an activist since I was 15 years old. I'm going on like 38 years of this. All right. There has never been a more important moment in American history to have those conversations with everyone. All right. Okay. So that's my advice there, is just like, please, every strategy that you use in terms of deep canvassing, you should be using with people that you know at work. All right. And again, that means curiosity. That means asking questions. It means active listening. It does not mean beating people over the head with your opinion. It means engaging in conversations about common values. I'm sorry. Somebody just made me laugh in the comments. Potato salad with raisins. All right. Like you're taking me back to a Chadwick Boseman moment. All right. Anyhow, thank you, SNL. All right. I want to just add one other thing here, okay? Because you all know, those of you who've been around here for a very long time have heard me have conversations about the way in which like I canvass people nonstop. That unless I know somebody is on our side of the fence, I'm asking who they're voting for or how they feel about the current political situation. Like what are the developments that are rational in their minds about what's happening and what they have questions about? Because I really want people to know the importance of what's going on, right? And I want people to know where to vote. And I want to make sure people are registered to vote, right? And again, I don't really care any longer if people don't like me because of that. I've told the story about getting booted out of the parent chat during COVID at my kids' old school because I was advocating on behalf of teachers who I really didn't think should be infected because some, uber rich white people wanted like free childcare for their kids while the pandemic was going on. I don't hesitate any longer to make my opinion heard. And I really want to encourage all of you. Again, yes, points being made in the comments. Empathy, right? Make sure that, you are acting from a place of compassion, even if you have to go home and then complain to somebody who really gets it about the conversation that you had and the fact that you think the person you were talking to was really ill-informed. In the moment, you've got to be compassionate and empathetic, and you've got to engage in active listening, and you've got to try to find common ground and common values that you can share with other people to persuade them. All right. Really critical, like no excuses this time around. All right. We had a couple of questions about JD Vance. And, we've talked about JD Vance a lot here on the broadcast since the RNC. I'm just going to say this, okay? A lot of people have said to me in recent days, there's been a lot of questions coming up about like, well, Trump could go to prison. What happens then? All right. So let me just say this. I've said this from the beginning. JD Vance is the Project 2025 pick. Why? Because if Trump is incapacitated, and we already know that he's in like grave and increasing mental decline, if he is incapacitated in any way and the 25th Amendment is invoked, let's just say hypothetically, if he's elected, which is not going to happen because we're all going to do the work. All right. But JD Vance would become the president. And JD Vance is someone who will sell his soul for $1. And one of the things that means is that given his worldview, and particularly the way that his worldview has changed for the sake of his own craven political ambition, he will be far more reliable in terms of executing on what's contained in Project 2025 than, like 34 times convicted felon with dementia is likely to be. So again, I really need people to get like on the good foot, so to speak, about talking about Project 2025 in the context of JD Vance. We can all have a lot of fun times talking about like couches and dolphins in relation to JD Vance, but what really needs to be the focus of JD Vance's candidacy is that he's like a fascist through and through, and a much more reliable fascist than Donald Trump. And that's why he was chosen. He was chosen by Sebastian Gorka in conjunction with Don Jr., all right? And Sebastian Gorka is a fascist. Like a through and through Nazi memorabilia collecting fascist. So again, Vance is incredibly dangerous. And one of the things that we need to be messaging in the context of all of this is like, if you are concerned about Project 2025, you need to be gravely concerned about JD Vance as a vice presidential candidate, because he could end up in the presidency if Trump is elected. Like, this is another talking point that we very much need to be focused on right now. All right. Now, speaking of vice presidential picks, again, we're in like, VP pick bingo for Kamala Harris right now. And I don't want to do any more tea leaf reading. I've done so much of it here. I will say that I'm very impressed at the moment by what Tim Walz has been out there doing. I am not concerned, nor do I think any of you should be, about the potential statewide implications of this. I've already said I hope it's not Josh Shapiro just because of the state of play in Pennsylvania. But regardless, I truly believe, and have no reason not to believe, that the Harris campaign is considering the potential state impact with regard to all of the nominees, all of the potential nominees, rather, who are governors. All right. I do not, they are smart people. They are not going to make a decision that is going to jeopardize control of a given swing state by nominating someone where there would be a serious risk if that person then became the vice president. All right. So I personally, okay, I don't know who this person is, but this person's going to. Bye. I need my troll bell back. I am going to just encourage everyone to make sure that when you are talking about potential vice presidential picks, you're also amplifying the fact that this vetting process is really thorough. Okay, because I'm going to remind everybody that, like, unlike what happened with the Trump campaign, the VP vetting process historically goes very, very deep into all the potential implications of nominating someone as vice president, right? There was such a scandal when Sarah Palin was, announced as a vice presidential candidate by none other than Steve Schmidt for the McCain campaign, because that vetting had not gone deep enough to find out that her teenage daughter at the time was pregnant, right? And that had an implication, unfortunately, to the campaign for all sorts of reasons having to do with sexism and how much we hate single mothers in this country. But leaving that aside, because I never like to defend Sarah Palin, I just want to point out that ordinarily the historic process is like akin to getting a security clearance. All right. It's about like the financial background of the person who's being nominated, all the political positions they've ever taken, whether or not they have any scandalous skeletons in their closet that could potentially come out. Right. And then there's account taken of like, who do they bring to the ticket? Is it a state? Is it a certain representative group? Who's likely to be excited by their candidacy? How do they balance the ticket, right? And then there are also considerations of what does it mean if they vacate the seat they currently hold? What does it mean for the particular body which they currently occupy, right? Like all these things are taken under consideration. And so the thing that we need to be amplifying is that Kamala Harris's team knows what they're doing, right? And I do want to reiterate, I'm still all in for Pete. I know there is a narrow short list right now that is allegedly public, but never say never. We'll see what happens with this. All right. I think we have a very deep bench. We have enormous possibility here from the standpoint of like where things can go in terms of nominees. And I'm pleased, frankly. I don't think that any of the people, again, Josh Shapiro's at the bottom of my list, but I will tell you that I think of the people who are currently on the short list, I think there's a lot of good options. And so we'll see. Crockett is not going to be a nominee. I've already said this. She doesn't have the depth of experience right now that brings something to the ticket that is necessary. Because reminder, one of the things that is usually taken into account is can the person bring a swing state or another representative group that is not already behind this ticket 100% to the ticket. All right. I love Jasmine Crockett, but she has a tremendous future ahead of her in the House and probably in, a broader nationwide role. All right. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. Okay. Last thought for today, which I think is really, really critical. All right. We're now 98 days from the election. And a lot of great comments this morning on the Patreon feed from people there about all the volunteer work that they have now started doing, the canvassing that they did this weekend, the phone banking that they've done for the first time, the text banking that they've moved, toward doing after a lot of fear and the results that they're seeing from that. Their experiences in debrief from text banking, where they're listening to 15-year-olds who are out there text banking for Kamala Harris and the experience that they've had doing it. Okay, I want to remind you all that part of the point of doing this work is not just to get the candidate elected or to get out the vote, right? Part of it is also that you are building community while you do it. And if you are doing it where you live or you are doing it for a candidate that you care about, that community becomes something akin to a lifeline. It also becomes something akin to its own self-generating motivational circle, okay? Because you see the successes that other people have when you're doing it in community with them, and that motivates you to continue doing more. So I really want people to be thoughtful about how you're volunteering, because in addition to having all the conversations that we talked about already on the broadcast today, it's wildly necessary that you get involved in doing volunteer work through mobilize.us. Find an event that you care about, go check it out today, and figure out how much time you're going to commit, right? We talked about this last week after the white woman call about, the need to say, what are the 3 things you're going to do in the next month to make sure Kamala Harris gets elected? I'm also just going to say, what are the 3 things that you're going to do in the next month to make sure that we flip a seat from red to blue, whether it's the Senate or the House? What are 3 things that you're going to do in the next month to make sure that you're getting out the vote where you live? All right. These are all things that we desperately need to get focused on right now. And it's a short window of time, but I'm just going to say one other thing here. We are, and lots of other commentators pointed this out over the weekend on Threads, but I want to make this super duper clear right now. Okay. We are at a real turning point right now in this country. By the way, I know all of you have probably been paying attention to this, but the fact that the Harris campaign over the weekend referred to Trump and his campaign as weird has apparently really set off the far right. Vivek Ramaswamy is out there this morning, don't call us weird. How are you calling us weird? DEI is weird. They're very defensive about this. All right. One of the things that we need to keep in mind here is that messaging really matters right now. And also we have an opportunity in doing all of this to really turn a corner in this country. All right. Trumpism is losing its power over people. And I know that a lot of people are like, well, what if he runs in 2028? I'm just going to tell you right now, Trump is not going to be competent enough to run in 2028. He's barely competent enough to run now. So this is a moment where we have an opportunity to make sure that Trump is never a powerful political figure in this country again. And we have 98 days to do it. I think it was Mo who pointed out on Threads this weekend that we could actually get to Thanksgiving and have a Trump-free Thanksgiving in this country for the first time since 2015. Can you imagine? Right? Now, I don't want anyone to mistake me. Fascism is still a huge burgeoning issue in America. And there will be like attempted replacements of Trump once he's off the national stage. We are never again going to be able to be complacent, but we could end the powerful stranglehold that Trumpism has over 25% of this population, and, you know, the sway that he has over media and everything else right now in this country from the standpoint of like how he's being used for clicks and profit. That could all end the first week in November if we do the work for the next 98 days. So I really critically want everyone to focus right now, right? It's an all hands on deck moment. It's not a huge window of time, right? This is the moment to decide what you as an individual and you in your community and in your family and with your friends are going to do for the next 98 days to end this, right? To really turn the corner on this disgusting and horrifying chapter in American history. Like, let's get it done. And, you know, I'm with all of you. Like, we're not going back, okay? I said this morning on Threads, my dad was born the same year as Emmett Till. I was 3 years old before women could open a bank account in this country in their own name. When I was born, abortion wasn't legal anywhere. Okay. Like, this is not ancient history. We have made enormous progress in my lifetime alone and in the lifetime of my parents. And I have to remind everybody that if you think it can't get worse, it can. And also that the power to make sure that we turn this corner lies with each and every one of us working in collective. I'm going to tell you guys like one tiny little story here, because I had an event even this morning that really like gave me hope. So, you know, I have to register my kids here for school, right? You know, like one of the reasons why we moved here, well, you all know this story, right? To get my kid into a safer environment. So I had to have a phone call this morning with the local school district, with the registration office, okay? And the woman who's on the phone with me from the registration office, like, says to me, oh, I think I've bought some things from Gaia, or I've done some things from Gaia with Gaia. And I said, oh, no, there's like a yoga company called Gaia. And then there's my company, which is like political consulting and women's leadership. And she's like, oh, wow, I bet you guys are really busy right now. And I said, yeah, we are. We're like all in for Kamala Harris. You know, we're out there doing training and I'm doing a lot of speaking on this. And she says to me, I was on the Win with Black Women call that happened the Sunday that Kamala was announced. And I was like, awesome. That's fantastic. Like, I'm really glad to hear that. And I said, I was on the white women call that happened like last week. And she was like, well, you guys really got it done. And I said, yeah. And, you know, we've also got to keep showing up because it's not just about the money. And she said, you know, it's so good to be able to have a conversation with someone that you've just met about the way in which all of us are going to come together to get this done. And I was like, yes, it is. Right. This is a stranger who I'm just like talking to on the phone. And it was one of those moments where I was like, this movement toward November is causing all of us to meet across all sorts of lines of identity and history and among strangers in the street and on phone calls, and to see one another for the first time and be like, I've got you, right? I mean, it was really one of those moments. And I got chills. And then I got my kids finalized for registration, which was awesome. But, you know, she said to me at the end of the call, and I said this back to her in a different way, like, I'm just really glad that we had an opportunity to have this conversation this morning for like 20 minutes about how much this all matters and how we're all going to work toward it. And I was like, yeah, me too. Like, let's keep it up. She said, I hope I get to meet you in person sometime. And I said, yeah, me too. Let's make that happen. These are the kind of things that can happen, right? When we all show up. And it's down to like the granular level. Like, this is literally somebody in the registration office of the public school system in my new town, right? Like, this is why all this stuff counts. This is why doing all of this work matters so much, because we are all in community with one another, like whether we acknowledge it or not. And the question is whether or not we're going to mobilize community to get this done. And now's the time. Like, now's the time. All right. Lots of love to all of you. I'm going to catch you here tomorrow again at regular time. So excited about this new time slot, by the way. Like, I'm just really glad to be back at the 11 a.m. Eastern time slot. It's like fantastic. So I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. Of course, if there's a need for a breaking news broadcast, I will see you later on today as always. And I am here now like 5 days a week at this time slot. The one possible exception is if my truck shows up from LA. We may have to have a later broadcast or an earlier broadcast one day this week because my stuff still is not here, like 12 days on. But I will let you all know that. And of course, the earliest way to find out about any of that is to become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistance live, because you get early notice of every broadcast that I do. All right. Much love, everyone. Please go volunteer. Go to mobilize.us and volunteer for a text banking, phone banking, canvassing slot for a candidate that you care about for the Harris campaign. Please get out there and do that work. Even if you only got an hour to spare on a Saturday afternoon from your couch, like, get it done. All right. Love you all. Thank you all for being here. Thanks particularly to our paid subscribers. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share this broadcast with everybody who needs it. All right. And give me a thumbs up while you're at it. All right. I'll see you all here tomorrow, if not before. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.